Gavin Newsom is currently the most likely candidate to win the 2028 Democratic nomination, but he's far from the clear favorite. According to the latest prediction market odds, he has just a 16% chance of securing the nomination. Close behind him is Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro at 12%, followed by former Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg, Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer, New York Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Maryland Governor Wes Moore, and of course, former Vice President Kamala Harris, along with a handful of other candidates below 5%. At this stage, no single candidate has consolidated Democratic support, and it's unlikely anyone will reach 50% odds before the first debates, still more than 3 years away. That's not the case on the Republican side, where Vice President J.D. Vance is the clear frontrunner with a 45% chance of winning the nomination. While that's still not better than a coin flip, it puts him well ahead of any other contender. That brings us to the 2028 Electoral College map. While some shifts are expected, we are in the midst of a remarkably stable era where most states have either consistently voted the same way or maintained their swing state status for nearly 2 decades. For Democrats, the Pacific Coast blue wall. Washington, Oregon, California, and Hawaii remain solidly blue, along with Colorado and much of the Northeast, including Vermont, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New York, Delaware, Maryland, Washington, D.C., and Maine's 1st congressional district. Each of these states have voted Democratic in the last 9 presidential elections, with the lone exception being Colorado, which was a reliable Republican state before 2008. Republicans, meanwhile, are expected to hold Alaska, Utah, Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, North and South Dakota, Nebraska's statewide vote, plus its 3rd congressional district, Kansas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, and much of the Deep South, excluding Georgia. In the Midwest, Iowa, Missouri, Indiana, Kentucky, Ohio, and West Virginia are also firmly red. With the exception of Ohio, Iowa, Florida, and Indiana, these states have all gone Republican in 7 straight elections. That gives Republicans a strong foundation of 177 electoral votes in the race to 270. Democrats, meanwhile, start with a slightly lower base of 158 electoral votes, and that number comes with a more fragile outlook. While the few safe Republican states trending Democratic, like Nebraska and Kansas, are relatively small at 5 and 6 electoral votes, Democrats are at greater risk of losing their stronghold in New York, worth 28 electoral votes. Not to mention, Illinois, with 19 electoral votes, can no longer be considered a safe blue state after its margin narrowed by 6 points between 2020 and 2024. It's still very likely to go Democratic in 2028. An 11-point swing in a single cycle would be almost unheard of, especially considering that 2028 is expected to be a better year for Democrats than 2024. The state of Maine, meanwhile, also falls into the likely blue category. Its pro-Republican shift since 2020 was one of the smallest in the country, as it still backed Harris by 7 points. However, any Democratic gains are more than offset by Republicans being highly likely to hold Texas and its 40 electoral votes, the second largest prize after California. Some may argue that Texas should be in the safe Republican column, but there's just enough uncertainty to keep it in the likely category for now. While Hispanic voters in Texas shifted hard to the right, the state's large cities continue to attract large numbers of college graduates from across the country. And if there's one trend as strong as the rightward shift among minority voters, it's the leftward shift among college graduates. That's also the primary reason behind Nebraska and Kansas's gradual Democratic shift, and why Nebraska's 1st and 2nd congressional districts are becoming more favorable for Democrats. Nebraska's 2nd district is now effectively a likely blue constituency, having voted Democratic in the last 2 presidential elections. The 1st district, meanwhile, has voted Republican in every cycle since Nebraska began splitting its electoral votes. But in 2024, it saw its smallest Republican margin yet, shifting more than 5 points toward Democrats relative to the rest of the country. It remains likely Republican, but is definitely a district to watch over the next decade. Wrapping up the likely ratings in the Northeast, Maine's 2nd district remains likely Republican, having gone red since Trump's first election in 2016. While the district experienced a relatively muted pro-Trump swing compared to much of the country, his 9-point margin was still strong. Shifting to the Mid-Atlantic, New Jersey was a major story in the 2024 cycle. Along with New York, it saw the largest swing toward Trump of any state. Harris's 6-point victory margin in New Jersey was the narrowest for a Democrat since 1992, more than 10 points smaller than Biden's 2020 margin. This shift was largely due to low turnout compared to both 2020 and 2016, as well as significant rightward movement in North Jersey, particularly in the New York metropolitan area. Some analysts believe New Jersey is on its way to becoming a swing state. I'm a bit more skeptical and still consider it a likely Democratic state heading into 2028. With that, Republicans now have 219 electoral votes, while Democrats stand at 194. That leaves 11 states worth a combined 125 electoral votes still in play. This is where the candidates themselves will start to matter. At this point, it's too early to determine whether Vance will be a below or above replacement level candidate. His first few months on the national stage were disastrous, reflected in abysmal favorability ratings. However, he has gradually improved and is now trending toward breaking even in the coming months. Realistically, it would be difficult for him to be less popular across the political spectrum than Donald Trump. On the other hand, he's unlikely to generate the same level of energy Trump has brought to the Republican base in recent cycles. Because of this, Vance may not have the same high ceiling as Trump, but his floor isn't necessarily much lower either. If he proves to be roughly as strong a candidate as Trump, that's good news for Republicans, especially since Democrats don't have a clear standout alternative. Among the likely Democratic contenders, Josh Shapiro stands out as someone who could appeal to independents and moderate voters. However, as with any potential Democrat, there are a whole lot of questions about whether he can navigate the long and grueling Democratic primary process. Shapiro's biggest selling point is his track record as governor of Pennsylvania, where he has proven himself as an overperformer in the most critical swing state on the electoral map, winning the 2022 gubernatorial election by about 15 points, the largest margin for a non-incumbent candidate for Pennsylvania governor since 1946. Shapiro's perceived moderate working-class appeal could also translate well into neighboring battlegrounds like Wisconsin and Michigan. A key argument in his favor will likely be the straightforward electoral math. If Democrats hold all the states they won in 2024 and flip the Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin trio, they would reclaim the White House. For now, though, and for the purposes of this video, we're filling out this map under the assumption that both candidates are simply average, the most generic Democrat versus the most generic Republican. All right, enough dilly-dallying. Let's break down the remaining states. At this point, Republicans have the upper hand in both Nevada and Arizona. While Kamala Harris generally performed better in battleground states than elsewhere, that wasn't the case here. Both states shifted about 5.5 points toward Trump between 2020 and 2024, the sharpest movement among closely contested states. Unless Democrats nominate someone like Arizona Senators Mark Kelly or Ruben Gallego, they will enter 2028 as underdogs in these key Southwest battlegrounds. New Mexico, meanwhile, leans blue. I've long viewed it as a potential sleeper flip for Republicans due to its relatively low college-educated population. While it did shift 5 points toward Trump, resulting in a Harris +6 margin in 2024, it didn't move as sharply as other heavily Hispanic states. In particular, Hispanic voters in the Albuquerque metro showed a surprisingly muted rightward shift. Moving over to the southeast, to Georgia and North Carolina, while both states voted for Trump, by 2 and 3 points, respectively, they continued their leftward trend relative to the rest of the country. By 2028, it's very likely that Democrats will prioritize Georgia and North Carolina over Arizona and Nevada. Not only do they offer larger electoral vote prizes, but they're also simply more competitive for Democrats at this point. For context, back in 2016, when Hillary Clinton won the national popular vote by 2.1%, she lost Georgia by 5 points and North Carolina by almost 4. If Kamala Harris had replicated Clinton's 2.1% national margin in 2024, she would have pulled even in Georgia and closed to within about a point in North Carolina. Again, for the purposes of this video, where we're assuming a relatively neutral national environment between two generic candidates, Georgia is effectively a toss-up, while North Carolina maintains a slight Republican tilt. Moving up the coast, both Virginia and New Hampshire fall into the lean blue category. Harris won Virginia by about 6 points in 2024 and New Hampshire by around 3. Both states shifted roughly 4.5 points toward Trump from 2020 to 2024, placing them in the middle of the pack nationally. Minnesota also lands in the lean blue column. Harris carried the state by 4 points in 2024, marking the 13th consecutive Democratic presidential win in Minnesota, the longest active streak of any U.S. state. Minnesota saw a smaller shift toward Trump than most battlegrounds, moving less than 3 points, making it one of the least pro-Trump swing states in the country. That leaves us with the core Rust Belt trio, the states that yet again are likely to define another presidential election cycle. Boring, I know, but it is what it is. In a neutral national environment, all three would join Georgia in the toss-up column. Donald Trump won Wisconsin by about a point, and Michigan and Pennsylvania by roughly 1.5 points. That means if the popular vote were even, he very well could have lost all three. From an electoral math standpoint, without Georgia, Democrats would need to sweep all three Rust Belt states to reach 270 electoral votes. Meanwhile, Republicans could secure victory with just Pennsylvania, even if they lose Michigan, Wisconsin, and Georgia. Statistically, this gives Republicans an edge in the race to 270. Their margin for error is simply larger than Democrats given the current electoral map. That said, because these states are so closely contested in a neutral national environment, a strong candidate on either side could realistically sweep all four, just as Biden did in 2020 and Trump did in 2024. In fact, the odds of the four states splitting 2-2 are about as high as either party winning them all. However, with no clear Democratic frontrunner just yet, I'll keep them in the toss-up category for now. As always, feel free to share your thoughts on this map in the comments and suggest any other videos or topics you'd like me to cover. That does it for today's video. Shout out to my channel members listed in the description below. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a like if you enjoyed the video. Check out more of my content here, and as always, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. EP out.